the only true hedge against inflation is real estate. And I see us going into another inflationary period. I believe that he's right. As long as you can increase your rents, you have a hedge against inflation.
How are you? Thank you for coming back. As you've seen, we've changed the name of the channel to the Signet podcast. That's just to keep everything consistent with the brand of the company. Today, I'm excited to bring to you one of my favorite people in the world. Lorna Auerbach is the CEO of Auerbach Realty Holdings, LLC, Auerbach Commercial Realty Corp., as well as Auerbach Enterprises. Lorna Auerbach oversees a multi-state portfolio consisting of multifamily and retail in the states of California, Colorado, Nevada, Oregon, and Texas. Please enjoy this episode and please forward it to anybody that can benefit from watching the Signet podcast, and really appreciate my subscribers. Thank you. Lorna, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you in Santa Monica. I'm happy to see your office finally. And it's beautiful, and thank you for your time. I'm so happy to be with you.
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
You're so sweet. You give me your time, and it really does mean a lot to me.
Well, I'm very flattered that you asked me. I hope I have something to contribute.
Yeah, you definitely do. You always have. I mean, I still need to read the book by Sam Zell that you told me about. It's on my desk, and that's actually my next read. I just finished a book yesterday, so yeah. So I wanted to ask, to start off, your background a little bit, how you got started in real estate, and what was your entry point?
Well, everybody in my family, I think, must have the real estate gene, because our family on the Auerbach side, which is spread all across the United States and Canada, is in some aspect of the business, either architecture, construction, development, etc. And I never really thought about going into the business, because when I was growing up, women typically didn't go into the family business or their father's business, and my father, whom I had a lot of respect for, encouraged me to become a teacher. And my path was through political science and history, and then went on to teaching high school in the inner city. Wow. But every time we would get together with our family, everybody was talking about real estate. And I wanted to be part of the conversation. And I also realized I didn't have any brothers to ultimately step in and take over, which would have been the tradition. And so after 7 years of teaching, I approached my father and I said, I'd really like to come into the business. I want to learn from you. Somebody has to understand what's going on and be able to take over at some point. And I would like the opportunity to do that. So the first thing he said to me is, well, then you've got to get your license. That's the first step. So don't leave teaching, don't burn any bridges, get your real estate license first, take a leave of absence, and try it for a year. And if you might find out it's great, and then you can quit teaching, or it's not right for you and you can go back. So I got my license. I came to work for him in the late 70s. I was in my late 20s, and he put me to work for one of his in-house brokers. Learning from her, actually, I was working under a woman. And at the time, we had just completed construction on 48 townhomes in Santa Monica. We were building very contemporary homes in Glendale, and we had 2 office buildings under construction in Santa Monica. And he had me sitting on the open houses during construction, and I had to work on getting the permanent financing on the office buildings. Wow. And interest rates were double digit at that time, and I didn't understand the vocabulary of real estate. It was like learning a different language. Literally, I would go home and I would cry. I had no idea what anybody was talking about. It really was like learning a foreign language. And I went to him one day and I said, I really think I need to go back to school. I need to get an MBA. I need to learn more about real estate. And he said, it's a complete waste of time and money. I don't believe in it. I've got a lot of MBAs working for me. They don't know anything. That was his attitude.
Wow.
And he really had never gone beyond a high school education. And then he enlisted in the military. Well, he didn't even wait to be drafted when World War II broke out. He rose to the rank of captain. And he learned a lot, I think, about leadership and management in the military. And he really believed that the best way to learn a business was on the ground, from the ground up. And he would say to me, either you have it or you don't. Somebody can't teach it to you. You've got to have a feeling for it. You've got to have a vision. And I did learn a tremendous amount going through a very difficult time in our industry. It was very challenging, kind of like it is today, but in a different way.
Right. Were you, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. It was my understanding that your dad didn't make it easy for you, that you really had to earn your keep in the business. You had to learn, and you had to, it wasn't just, you work for the family business.
Not at all. He was tough. And I started as a broker, so I was leasing office space and helping to sell houses and working with retail tenants. Some of the tenants that we have today, which are 25 years later, are tenants that I leased to, negotiated deals for. And then from leasing, I realized that you had to have a really great product. It had to be well managed in order to attract good tenants. And we didn't really have a professional property management organization at the time. We had bookkeepers collecting rents and nobody really with any professional training. And I said to him, I think we need to professionalize our organization. And he said, look, I don't know how to teach you how to do that. I'm a transactional guy, but whatever you want to do. You want to start a property management business, go for it. So I joined the Institute of Real Estate Management, and I took all their courses, and I got my CPM designation, and then I applied for our company to get accredited management organization status. And in addition to that, I joined the International Council of Shopping Centers, and I started going to all their events and networking and meeting other people in the industry, and I learned from them. My father would tell me all the time, just sit in on meetings and watch and listen, but I'm not a teacher. I can't teach you. So I realized that I needed to go to school in my own way, and I wasn't at the point where I felt I could afford the time then to take off a year and go to business school. So I learned from peers in my industry, and then I qualified for Young Presidents Organization, YPO, which has given me tremendous amount of value and support, because today there are 29,000 members worldwide. You have to qualify before the age of 45. You have to have a certain annual gross income. Your company has to have a certain minimum number of employees to qualify. But once you get into the organization, you have a very strong peer network. So I joined the real estate network, the construction industry network. I got very active in my forum and in my chapter, and met members all over the world in our industry who really acted as my teachers and mentors.
I love that you're telling me this, because I listen to what you say, and it's really great advice. But one of my questions was, what do you think separates like a mom and pop real estate investor versus a sophisticated investor? And in a way, you put together a program that made it that looks at it a little bit more, not transactional, but in a more, in a more complex systems.
I was never involved on the acquisition side of the business,
Uh-huh.
as long as my father was alive. May he rest in peace.
Mm.
He handled all of the decisions regarding acquisitions. But what I learned from him is never fall in love with your real estate. That was one of his mantras. even though, and to be able to move from sector to sector to pay attention to what's happening in the economy, and what's happening, I think, regionally. For example, he started off as a builder. He built very large multifamily projects because he felt that there was times were changing. Women were entering the workforce. They needed childcare, so we would build large projects that had childcare facilities.
Oh wow!
And preschools and all kinds of gym equipment, outdoor parks for the kids within the complex, because he understood that as women were entering into the workforce, they needed to be able to leave their kids safely at home. And I think he was really at the forefront of that. And then when he saw that rent control was coming, he said he watched it happening in New York and in San Francisco. And he said, now is the time to move out of this sector, to get out of rent control before it hits California. Let's move into another sector. So then he moved into shopping centers. Okay. And actually, at the time that I joined him, he had just acquired a group of shopping centers, or was in the process. He was doing due diligence. And he sent me down to the seller's headquarters, and I had to abstract all the leases. So that was my first exposure to retail and shopping center leases. And then from there, he moved into office buildings, and he moved into single family homes. He was originally only in California, and then he saw that California prices were too high and he wasn't getting the returns he wanted, so he started looking out of state. And I think that's really what, that was a big take home for me. And that's the difference between maybe a mom and pop investor who doesn't see the big picture and holds on to what you would call legacy properties. Some of our properties are legacy properties. They've been in the family for 35 years, but others are not. There are a couple of properties that I just bought in the last couple of years, and it was a different market than what he had gone into. We bought in Colorado, and we bought single tenant retail properties, which he wasn't really looking at. So sometimes I have issues with my partners who want to hold on to things that don't make sense anymore.
Right.
And it's difficult to try to educate them also about reinvesting in properties, that owning real estate, and I think this is another thing that differentiates a more sophisticated investor from a mom and pop, is it's not a passive asset like owning stock or like owning bonds. You have to put on new roofs. You have to repair parking lots. You have to upgrade technology, whether it's taking an apartment building and moving it to keyless entry and putting in Amazon lockers and all the things that are changing in the marketplace. You have to keep up. Yeah. And so with a lot of mom and pop investors, they take their distributions, but they don't think about saving for the future and reinvesting in the building.
Okay. Yeah, speaking of saving, when this whole, I like to stay away from current events, but the whole purpose of this podcast was the long-term sustainability of being a property owner. The beginning of this, when COVID hit, I remember you said, this is why we say save for a rainy day. And what did you mean by that? Like, if somebody is new into real estate, what could they get out of that statement?
Well, what we did is we tried to pay down all our debt. So we had a lot of buildings that had no debt. And number two, keep low leverage. Mm-hmm. 3, I remember when variable interest rates first hit the market. This was like the new big thing. Now everybody just takes it for granted, but we didn't always have variable rates. We had fixed rates. And I remember when these young mortgage brokers would come to our office, they would try to sell my father on going for variable rate loans. And he said, no, because I want to be able to predict the next 15 years. I want to have fixed costs. I want to know what my mortgage payments are every month and not have them go up and down. The other thing that I learned is that our tenants are our partners.
Yeah.
And we invest heavily with them, especially in retail when they're first opening for business. We give them free rent. We invest in their tenant improvements. We contribute to the tenant improvements. And, we do everything that we can to help them succeed. So when COVID hit, we realized we're still partners. And we have to make the mortgage payments. We pay the property taxes. And we weren't getting, but we had to approach our lenders, who are also our partners, and ask for forbearance, which meant getting our lenders to work with us on maybe deferring payments for 6 months. We all thought this was going to be short term. Right. We had no idea this was going to go on for 3 years.
Yeah.
And if you have a good relationship with your lender, then your lender also realizes that he needs you to succeed. So we're this, idea of saying we're all in this together. Our restaurant tenants, we still do, we have many restaurant tenants came to us and said, we need to open up in our parking lot. Would you please work with us in the city to give us permission to serve on the sidewalk, serve in the parking lot? It means being flexible.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's an equilibrium. It's if the tenant doesn't succeed and you try to squeeze every penny from them, it becomes very hard to cover your mortgage payments and everything like that. But I'm thinking partnerships within the ownership group. What advice do you have to people when they're structuring partnerships for the long haul, and any advice about that?
Oh, yeah, I have a lot to say about that. Most people, when they're starting out in the business, don't have enough of their own capital to do deals by themselves. Maybe to buy a single family home, but if they want to buy an apartment building, they probably need to take in, especially young people, they have to take in outside investors. And a lot of times what's typical is to go to friends and family, and then your friends and family talk about how great the deal is, and they refer you to other people that are their friends, etc. And that's how they build these big partnership investment groups, taking in limited partners. And when my dad started, he started the same way. He came out of the Army. He didn't have his own capital, but he learned construction. He was a terrific contractor. His buildings, people will still say it's an Auerbach built building, and that's a sign of quality. And they're still standing. And so he was able to go to his buddies, who also had served during the war, and they were also entrepreneurs. So they owned gas stations, or they had a meat packing company. I mean, they had all kinds of businesses. Some of them were doctors. And they said, I'm earning good money now. I want to invest in real estate. Find me a deal. So he would go out and he'd find deals. He'd put his buddies in. And, he never thought beyond that generation. So they went in as general partners, which meant they were all equal and had to make decisions together. What I would say to young people who are doing that, I would never do it that way. I would say you go in as the general partner, and you take in your buddies as limited partners. You have to be the decision maker. You have to have authority to manage the asset. You have to be able to make capital calls when the project needs money. And because what happens when your partners have kids and their kids have kids, and their kids have kids, we're now dealing with the children and grandchildren of the founding generation. And it's very challenging for my daughter and me, because we grew up being active in the business, and we're dealing with partners who are passive investors.
Right.
And they don't have they just want their check every month.
Right.
And it's difficult sometimes for them to come up with the cash when we have to make a capital call to put on a new roof or repave a parking lot. Or how about an apartment building where, for the first time in the history of the building, we have close to a dozen vacancies at one time.
Wow.
Due to COVID.
Yeah.
And these units have not been touched for 20 years. And we've got to do massive renovations. And all of a sudden we have to come up with $1 million to invest in the building. So these are the challenges when you're dealing with partnerships. So my goal has been to buy out my partners, or have my partners buy me out, or make a decision to sell together, and let's go our separate ways.
Okay. So One of the things that I also wanted to ask you about, I mean, and this is speculation. Um, you're talking about grandkids and passing on properties. I always saw you as a long-term investor, probably one of the longest-term investors uh, that I've talked with. Um, why do you use that strategy? What is the ideal hold period for you, if there is one? It's kind of a trick question, I guess.
Okay, so
Um,
this is something that I learned from my father
mm,
also. He said you have to have the mentality of going to an auction. You sit when everybody is standing, you stand when everybody is sitting. Okay? And you have to sell when the time is right to sell. When you've gotten your best returns out of the property and there's no place else to go with it, that's the time to sell. If you can get, for example, if you sell a property in Southern California today, the buyer if it's a good property, say Santa Monica, Wilshire Boulevard, the buyer is only going to get a 1 or 2% return. So who's going to buy it? Somebody who's a generational buyer. And these usually are not, they're usually not Americans, because Americans think short term. They're usually foreign buyers who are buying for future generations, and they're willing to sit and maybe not make money, but they know that their children and their grandchildren will do really well. My father wanted strong cash on cash returns.
Okay.
He didn't think like an institutional investor who is looking at internal rates of return. He says, I want to know when I'm going to get my cash back and I'm going to start getting return on my cash. And so if he could buy a property in Texas or Nevada and get 7% on his money, he would sell his California property, which he did, and he would buy in Texas or Nevada or Colorado, or and get a 7% return. My daughter right now just sold a Southern California property, and she's looking. She's identified properties in Ohio, and Georgia, and Utah, which will give her much better returns. And what the institutions have to do, and a lot of general partnerships who take in limiteds, they have a 5 to 7 year hold period because they know that their investors want to get their money out.
right.
So the problem with that is they have to sell when it's a time to buy and buy when it's a time to sell. So I would rather be in a position of buying when it's the right time to buy, not just because it's 5 years or 7 years.
Right. It's funny because my friend told me, he suggested that I start this podcast because he saw a lot of the new mentality with crowdfunding, that a lot of these deals were very short-term deals, and he always saw me as, me and my family being a long-term holder, and maybe exposing that side of the business, that is a different way to think. And it's funny how I was going to call it the ironically contrarian, because it's ironic that it's so contrary to the instant gratification of making money fast, but that's sort of what I grew up with. So yeah, what regarding trends nowadays, maybe not so much with COVID, more with the internet and how things have been changing so much, how do you think that's going to impact retail and big cities, things like that?
Well, I've been hearing about the impact of technology on retail now for at least 5 years. And so personally, I'm investing in property technology and investing in the stock market in prop tech because I believe in it. I think that retailers who don't embrace it are going to be out of business. And I think one of the things that Amazon learned, and we learned from watching Amazon, that you can't just be online. You have to have brick and mortar to back it up. And if you have brick and mortar, you also have to have technology.
In a way, I think COVID had that effect. You had only online for a long time, or mostly online. Meetings were online, and people got tired of not going out. And now certain locations they're blowing up, 150%, 170% of sales before the pandemic, just because people want to get out there and they like the ambiance, the just, going to buy and try things on and that whole.
Well, Amazon is now buying pharmacy properties. They're
Oh, really?
opening up their
Wow.
own supermarkets. And then we have a tenant in one of our properties, Nordstrom.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were first
I was there
approached
this
by
morning.
our
I
broker,
go there almost every morning because
yeah,
the Starbucks.
and they
is there.
said Nordstrom wants to open up in your 1,500, 2,000 square feet. How do you open up?
Yeah.
I didn't get it, and then the broker explained to me, look, women don't want to. First of all, people don't want to deal with traffic anymore. They don't want to sit 30 minutes in their car to go shopping, and then especially women don't want to go into these underground parking lots and look for a
Right.
place to park and go into a big shopping mall. They want the convenience of being able to go to a neighborhood store to try clothes on, have them altered, have things delivered to that store, be able to return from that store. And Nordstrom figured it out. They figured it out when Saks didn't figure it out. Neiman's didn't figure it out.
Right.
I think about Nordstrom. Nordstrom is a multi-generational family business.
Oh, it
and
is?
their
I didn't know.
mission statement was always about service.
Mhm.
If you wear two shoes of two different sizes, they'll sell you the 8.5 and the 9. I mean, they bent over backwards to accommodate customers, and here they were doing it again. So they have gift wrapping. When I first went into the store when it opened, and I saw that they had fitting rooms, and they had a tailor there full time, and they had an online fashion consultant so you could stand with her at the computer monitor, and she would tell you what size you wore in a certain line and help you put together the whole wardrobe, have it delivered to their store. You could try it on there, and within a few blocks of your house. I thought this was genius.
Yeah.
And they decided to open up based on their customers' zip codes. They knew where their customers were coming from. So
Right.
they opened up a West Hollywood store, and they opened up a
Oh, that's
a
interesting.
Brentwood
Yeah.
store.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. I remember that was before. That was one of the first stores like that. I remember seeing it in the newspaper. So yeah, that is an interesting concept. It seems to be working really well.
Yeah.
I mean, I like it a lot, but I pretty much find something that I like and then I stick with it because I love shopping, but I like it too much and it keeps my life simple that way. You mentioned the teamwork of all the different parties in real estate, the brokers, the lenders, banks, the escrow, everybody. How important are those relations? How do you nourish those relationships?
Extremely important.
Yeah.
I think the relationship with the brokers is really critical,
Mhm.
and it's important to be very clear with the brokers as to what you're looking for, and so that you're not wasting a lot of their time,
Right.
and they're spinning their wheels, and have a clear strategy. And I know one of the things that I learned from my father, when a broker would call, the first thing he would say is this your listing?
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure it's your exclusive listing. 2, have you physically been to the property? And
Yeah.
tell me what's around it. Now remember, this was in the days before we had drones and before we had Google Earth. You had to have physically gone to the property. 2, he was very clear on what he was looking for. For example, in Santa Monica, he purchased multiple corner properties on Wilshire Boulevard. It wasn't by accident. He told the broker, don't bring me anything unless it's on a corner. And he had brokers who would look for things and it would be off market. They'd have to go and get a single party exclusive before he would look at it, because he wanted to avoid conflicts between brokers saying,
Okay.
I brought you the deal. No, I brought you the deal. And in working with attorneys, he would tell me, he surrounded himself with attorneys that he worked with they started with him maybe when they were in their 20s, and they're now my age, and we're still working together. It's almost like extended family. These are people who have a real deep knowledge of our industry and who I know I can trust. But one thing that he always reminded me of is attorneys can often be deal breakers. I know people have heard this before, because they're trying to protect your downside. And you ultimately have to make the business decision. And there's always risk. So you can't always listen to your attorney.
Yeah.
You have to go with your gut. And it's about having a vision and trusting your vision. Look at all the numbers, but then in the end you have to trust your own intuition.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I always felt that you have to manage everybody you work with and understand what their motivations are. A lawyer's job is to keep you safe, and sometimes that means not doing something that you are willing to take the risk to do. And sometimes it's reasonably understandable, sometimes it's not. Or not, but it's different than what the lawyer thinks you should do.
Now,
But they're a lawyer, not the business person.
Yeah. Also, the bankers. He had really good long-term relationships with his
Okay.
bankers. And one of his biggest complaints over the years was that the bankers that he worked with, they, at that point in real estate history, he could get an answer on a handshake. And things didn't have to
Right.
go through multiple layers of committee evaluations, etc. They knew him, they knew his reputation, they knew he had never defaulted on a loan, and they were always willing to provide him funding. But he saw over the years there was such turnover. The bankers that he worked with had been, with that bank for maybe 25 years.
Right.
And then he started seeing a lot of turnover as young people came in every 5 years. They would change, and he no longer had the relationships. So he decided to start his own bank. He said, I want to be the kind of bank that I would like to deal with, where I can finance a developer based on just knowing who he is, understanding his integrity, and having trust and believing in his project and not having to go through multiple layers to get approved.
I love his creative spirit of doing all these things that really were needed in the marketplace. That's very interesting. I also wanted to ask. Yeah, I'm wondering with brokers. Do you have like a few brokers that you are somewhat loyal to, or do you the shotgun approach of talking to every broker? Like, what's a better strategy? Because I could see how brokers might not want to work with you if you have everybody on the street.
In terms of leasing and selling our own properties, we use a third-party management company on a lot of our Southern California properties, and part of the agreement that we have with them is that they have exclusive leasing rights on the properties that they manage for us. They're a very sophisticated organization. We love working with them. They've brought us great tenants, and they do a really good job of representing us. In terms of looking for properties to acquire, we go out on our own. Typically what happens is we'll go on to CoStar or LoopNet, or we get thousands of submittals from all over the country of properties that are for sale. And we do our own underwriting here in the office. We do our own analysis. And then we typically will represent ourselves on the buy side.
Okay.
And we deal directly with the broker who has the listing.
Okay. That's interesting. Is there a certain state that you're looking to invest now, or that you're
Wherever
more
we
motivated?
can get the best return. So right now we're focusing on single tenant, triple net properties out of state. In state, we will look at multi-tenant properties because we can manage them ourselves.
Right.
But if we're going out of state, unless we're going to buy multiple properties in a single market, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And we're so heavy in multi-tenant retail right now that we're trying to branch out and diversify into other sectors.
Okay. Would you take other, just out of curiosity, I don't know if you do it only with like a family office type of business, or if you ever thought of starting a fund or anything like that. I don't know if that's what you'd be interested in.
I'm not interested. My daughter might be.
Oh, really? Okay.
I've been talking to somebody who's encouraging me to go in that direction.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to get out of partnerships.
Right.
And my feeling is
that's why
I would rather be smaller and be in control of my own destiny.
Right. I could totally understand that. There's a lot of flexibility you have when you don't have to answer to investors that may or may not have different objectives and, different goals. So,
Yeah. Unless you're completely in alignment, which I may be with a potential partner that's my peer and I understand how they operate, but I don't want then to leave that burden to my daughter and to her daughters.
Right. What do you
Yeah.
feel about like passive investing in other people's properties or?
I do it now.
Mm,
Yeah, but I've inherited a couple of passive investments where my
Right.
father was a passive investor. Those have not worked out so well.
mm,
I felt that I wasn't heavily enough invested in multifamily.
right.
And so a friend of mine who actually is an office building owner and developer
Right.
told me that she's been investing with this one organization that's buying a lot of large multifamily projects out of state, and she
Okay.
highly recommended them. I've been investing with them. I'm doing very well.
Okay.
Also investing with another friend who founded a company that loans money,
Right.
bridge loans. And so I'm investing with them, so we put out our money to lend to other developers,
Right.
doing very well with that. So I'm investing with others who are in sectors that I'm not in, who have
Right.
expertise
Yeah.
in areas that I don't. And, one of the things I want to say about being an active investor and having an organization to manage your properties in-house, my mother used to say to my father often, if you want to sleep at night, why don't we just sell the real estate and let's just buy bonds and clip coupons
Yeah.
and we won't have anything to worry about, because in our business you're always involved in lawsuits.
Yeah.
It just comes with the territory, and things are up and down, and there are plenty of times when you can't sleep at night. And he said the only true hedge against inflation is real estate. And I see us going into another inflationary period. I believe that he's right. As long as you can increase your rents, you have a hedge against inflation. The problem is that a lot of us, after the last go round where we had rents tied to consumer price index, the consumer price index was double digit, a lot of tenants couldn't pay it,
Right.
put them out of business. So then we went back the other way. And then we had leases where no tenant would sign more than a 2% annual increase. Well, we're already up to between 4 and 5% inflation. In situations like that, it's not a hedge against inflation.
Yeah.
So the sectors that are doing well are multifamily. If they're not in rent control, they can keep up with inflation. And I would say, industrial business parks where you're on short-term leases, 1, 2, 3-year leases, those are good hedges against inflation.
Yeah. No, inflation is definitely a concern. That's like one of the main topics. Probably a key word right now. It's hard to. Some people say it won't happen. Some people say it's already happening. But I think real estate is incredible for inflation in apartment buildings because they get reset every year. So I mean, not rent control ones, but yeah, some commercial properties, those 70-year Walgreens that are fixed at a certain rate. That's the opposite of a. That's not. It sounds like a safe investment, but it may not be.
Well, one of the things that I think about when we're looking at properties now is some of the properties that we're looking at, which are really great, there's only 5 years remaining on the lease. Or we'll look at a property where there are 10 years remaining, but the tenant has the option to cancel after 5.
Right.
So then you think, okay, well, there are pros and cons. If I lose the tenant after 5, then I can mark the property to market. The problem
Right.
is I can't get a lender to finance a property that's just got 5 years
Yeah.
on the lease
Yeah.
if the lender is looking at giving me a 15-year loan. So you have to weigh the pros and cons.
Yeah, I've thought of that a little bit where I don't like 5-year leases because it does make it hard. Let's say you want to sell the building. It makes it very unmarketable to somebody who wants to get a loan, which could hurt your pool of potential buyers. Are there any risks that you look for when you're looking for a new property that somebody might not be aware of?
1, does the tenant have the right to cancel?
Right.
2, I don't like that. If the tenant has the right to cancel, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a lease.
Yeah.
Is it a one-time right or an ongoing right? Number 2, does the tenant have the right of first refusal to purchase the property himself, or the right of first offer? In that case, the tenant is going to be competing against me for the property.
Right.
3, Are there any environmental issues that I don't know about? Like a massive chemical cleanup, which could cost over $1 million. 4, how much deferred maintenance is on the building? Do I need to put on a new roof? Do I need to, are there new, for example, in Santa Monica, has the building been tagged for an earthquake retrofit? That's $1 million, depending on the size of the building. And then the other thing I look for is escalations in the lease. I want to make sure that I'm getting escalations that can keep up with inflation.
That's a good list. That's a very good list. All right. Well, do you have any? We're pretty much done. Well, one question I wanted to ask you, and I think I asked this because of my uncles. My uncles are dentists, and there was at one point where my father and me were helping them put their money in real estate. So this question comes out of that. Do you think dentists, doctors, people that are not in real estate should be investing in real estate?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because they can't work forever.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my father's investors were professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And basically his approach to them is, what's your retirement plan?
Right.
So some people believe in the stock market, other people believe in buying bonds, because independent entrepreneurs don't have the same type of investment vehicles provided by their companies as if they work for a large corporation, right? So they have to think like entrepreneurs in terms of their retirement too. And he was a strong believer in real estate, and they saw how well he did with it. And it did become a great source of retirement income for all of those investors. So once they sold their practice or retired, they were getting regular checks every month.
What I like about that idea too is you could kind of utilize leverage in a way where you could buy a little bit more than you have all cash, and it expires, or the term of the loan ends when you want to retire, and then you have a much higher cash flow than you would have had if you just bought something all cash, and it sort of pays for itself. What do you think's the hardest lesson that real estate has taught you about being a business person? I guess in life too.
I think the toughest lessons that I've learned have to do with dealing with partners.
Really? Wow. Yeah.
That I'm not the master of my destiny, that I can't make the decisions that I think are best for the property because I'm not in alignment with my partner's goals. For example, my daughter and I believe that our legacy properties, a lot of them are old and tired and need to be repurposed, that they are that the lots are being underutilized. For example, we have a single-story retail building on a prime boulevard that is on a big lot, and it really should be an apartment building. It should be a multifamily building. We have a huge housing shortage in the state. We all know that, multifamily. She would like to build senior housing, and she's got some really innovative ideas about how that should be done. Fortunately, that property is not in a partnership. Mm-hmm. But I owned other properties similar with a partner who did not want to develop. He wanted to continue with passive income, didn't want to put any money into the property, didn't want to refinance, and that was a problem. Yeah. So we agreed to sell together, and in some cases we agreed to buy each other out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Last question. What are your 3 key daily habits that help you sort of organize your day and give you I've heard from other people, when you're in business, you're very sophisticated, savvy. Everybody I know respects you, besides the fact that they like you as a person. They respect your knowledge and the way you handle yourself. So what are your habits that help you set your day up for that kind of success?
I get up at 5:30 every morning, and I walk our 2 dogs with my husband. That's our quiet time to kind of talk and share ideas and our plans for the day. And by 6:30 a.m., we're back home. And I picked up the Wall Street Journal from the driveway, and I sit outside on the patio with my Wall Street Journal and my coffee, and I go through the whole newspaper, and I'm an avid clipper of articles that I want to reread, or I read about stocks that I want to invest in. And then I go through all my emails, and what else do I do? I mean, those are two key habits that I'm pretty rigid about. What is the third one? I think having dinner with my husband every night at a set time, which is really early. And that was kind of a critical part of my growing up, is always having dinner together as a family.
Yeah.
And we used to, I think I was thinking about last summer, our daughters would come over every Sunday with their friends. And that's another habit that I love, is being outside with the family on Sunday. And having at least one day a week that's a family day is really important to me.